The Christmas decorations are all in place, probably both at home and certainly in the stores by now. The Christmas carols have been cranked out 24/7 on many of the top radio stations for at least 3 weeks now, and we've already gotten our first glimpse of Santa at the holiday parades. And because of the disruption in the supply chains, many of us were probably careful to make sure we had finished our Christmas shopping early. We've checked box after box on our holiday to-do list. So what's left to do? Well, for some, all that's left is showing up and at church, singing a few beloved Christmas carols and getting some warm, fuzzy words of hope in this first Sunday of Advent, right? Wrong, says Kathy Beach Verhey. For if we show up on this first Sunday of Advent, expecting more of what our culture offers, glitz and glamour, we're in for a rude awakening. For in the assigned gospel reading for the day, she writes, we do not encounter the sweet baby Jesus that people are waiting for during Advent, but rather the stern adult Jesus, picturing the whole universe as being shaken and turned upside down. So why do we have to deal with such an unsettling passage that talks about Jesus' second coming instead of his first? And what do those uncomfortable words have to tell us about hope? Well, listen, as I carefully read this week's passage, and then let's come back together and see if we can figure some of that out. So here now, Luke chapter 21, verses 25 through 36, as read from the Common English Bible. There will be signs, Jesus said, in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, there will be dismay among nations in their confusion over the roaring of the sea and surging of the waves. The planets and other heavenly bodies will be shaken, causing people to faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. Then they will see the human one coming on a cloud with power and great splendor. Now, when these things begin to happen, stand up straight and raise your heads, because your redemption is near. Jesus then told him a parable. Look at the fig tree and all the trees. When they sprout leaves, you can see for yourselves and know that summer is near. And in the same way, when you see these things happening, you know that God's kingdom is near. I assure you that this generation won't pass away until everything has happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away. Take care that your hearts aren't dulled by drinking parties, by drunkenness and anxieties of day-to-day life. Don't let that day fall upon you unexpectedly like a trap. It will come upon everyone who lives on the face of the whole earth. So stay alert at all times, praying that you are strong enough to escape everything that is about to happen and to stand before the human one. Thus ends the sacred reading. Now, while these words from the Gospel according to Luke may not be the kind of words that we want to hear, this week I found that they were unexpectedly and strangely comforting. For when I read those words in verse 26, words about, and I quote, the planets and heavenly bodies being shaken, causing people to faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world. Oh boy, you could sure relate to those things. For you see, over the past couple of months, couple of years even, we have lived in a world that seems to be constantly shaken, constantly turned upside down. And every time I get a ding on my smartphone, giving me the latest news update from the LA Times, I have to admit that I flinch a little, for I never know what that ding is going to tell me. A few weeks ago, for instance, I got a little ding telling me that a shooter who had taken 2 lives, had been acquitted on all counts in Wisconsin. Then a few days later, I got another ding telling me that another shooter and 2 of his cohorts had now been convicted of their crimes in Georgia. A few weeks ago, a ding told me that the COVID booster was now available for all adults in the US, while another series of dings over the weekend told me about the appearance of yet another variant of COVID, the Omicron, that poses a new set of challenges. Boy, in this time, I felt as if I was living on a constant roller coaster, up one moment and down the next. Every time I hear that ding, I can sure relate to the sense of fear and foreboding that Jesus was talking about. For those simple and piercing dings remind me that I live in a world where I no longer know what to expect. A world where so many things seem to lie beyond my and our control. Well, if that's where the reading had ended, stuck in that place of fear and foreboding, it would have been an awful way to begin the Advent season. And hope this week's word would have been the last concept on our lips. But thankfully, the reading didn't end there. For Jesus' words about the ways in which God breaks into our world, be that in the past in Bethlehem or in the future, they culminate with a simple and grounding truth. They remind us that while heaven and earth are stuck in that roller coaster and will surely pass one day, Jesus' words, his wisdom will not. That, friends, is the rock solid foundation upon which we can stand. And here is where the words of biblical commentator Wesley Avram come in so handy. For in speaking of this morning's passage, Wesley reminded us that the world we people of faith inhabit is so much greater than the one defined by those dings on our smartphones. For as we prepare this year once again to wrap ourselves in the Christmas story, Avram wrote, that story is a story of a time bigger than any of our own stories, and of a time that gives lives a meaning full of promise that words like optimism and pessimism cannot even begin to capture. Jesus' words today capture what Avram called, and I quote, an eschatology of eventfulness, in which we live our lives and see all of creation alive in a rhythm of both reality and promise. Reality and promise. Oh, and as I thought of those balancing concepts, I realized that that's where my passion for the 12 steps can come in handy as I try to unpack the complexity of today's reading. For to use Avram's words, the 12-step reminds us that nothing can happen to us that is outside the realm or the presence of God. Not even the worst, the biggest, the baddest things that could happen are still within that realm. For when our worlds are shaken and turned upside down in the sort of ways Jesus talked about, we can still receive, amidst the turbulence, a blessing, a wake-up call, if you will, to move beyond our long buried or long denied problems so that we can finally find our way to the hope and the promise that God has for us. The power of God breaking into our world, both Christmas and other times as well, is that it reveals to us a powerful reality. And that reality, Wesley Avram concluded, is this: anything can happen at any moment. And in one way, he continues, in one way or another, everything is happening in every moment. And there is no present moment to which one can cling. And change is never limited by things like predictability or even our need for control. And that, my friends, is where our hope, our real hope, lies as we start this Advent journey, in the knowledge that anything can happen. And when I claim that simple truth, when I hear the next ding on my smartphone, I don't have to flinch anymore, wondering what a judge or jury's decision might be for this day. For I can live into a world that is far greater than a court, a world where things like racial justice and racial reconciliation are possible at the deepest and most long-lasting level. And where, when I hear another ding, I no longer have to fear news of the latest development with COVID, where I can begin to live into a world where, get this, both science and faith embrace in ways that produce unprecedented collaboration rather than the unparalleled conflict that COVID has created these days. That it can birth a world where health is defined in ways that are far greater than simply the presence or the absence of a virus. For the good news of Advent, Kathy Beach Derhay reminds us, is not simply that Christ is coming, but rather that his coming means we can hope, despite all that is falling apart in our lives, our community, and even in the world around us. No matter what news our smartphones may bring, the lasting truth that Advent calls us to is this, found in verse 28 of today's reading. Redemption is near. Redemption is near. Redemption is near. And friends, if that doesn't point us to hope that transcends our trials and tribulations, then I don't know what will. My prayer for us in closing is that we will have the good sense to follow Jesus' words and stand up straight and raise our heads as we look beyond the what is to the what will be this Christmas and far, far beyond. May it be so. Amen.